Today, we're going to dive deep into the fascinating architecture of your short-term memory. Yeah, I'm talking about that mental workspace you're using right this very second to process what I'm saying. So let's kick things off with a puzzle we've all faced. You get a new phone number and you have to hold it in your head just long enough to punch it into your phone. What's actually happening in there? How does your brain juggle that info without dropping it, especially when your friend starts talking to you halfway through? Well, to answer that, we've got to look at how our whole understanding of memory has changed over time. We're going to see how the thinking evolved from a really simple map of the mind to something much, much more dynamic. Okay, so the first major attempt to explain this was something called the multi-store model, and it was pretty straightforward. It basically said that your short-term memory was just one box, a single storage closet where you temporarily toss information before it either vanishes or gets filed away in long-term storage. But that whole single box idea, it just doesn't cut it. It's way too simple to explain all the complex stuff we do, like remembering a string of numbers while also dealing with a visual layout of a keypad. It just couldn't explain the active mental gymnastics our minds are doing all the time. And that's where two psychologists, Alan Baddeley and Graham Hitch, came in. Back in 1974, they proposed this revolutionary new idea. They said, hey, what if short-term memory isn't a passive box at all? What if it's an active, bustling workspace with different parts that all work together? And they called it the working memory model. All right, so it's time to meet the specialized team that makes up your working memory. Don't think of it like a storage locker anymore. Instead, picture a busy office with a manager and a few specialist employees who all have very specific jobs. And here's the whole org chart, you could say. You can see you've got this central manager right at the top, and reporting to it are its specialist helpers. Each one is a pro at what they do. First up, you've got the boss, the central executive. This part is kind of like the conductor of an orchestra or the CEO of a company. It's the one in charge of your attention. Now, here's what's so cool about the central executive. It doesn't actually store any information itself. Nope. Its critical job is to coordinate the other systems, to direct your focus, and to decide which tasks get your brain's resources. It's the ultimate decision maker. Next, we meet our first specialist employee, the phonological loop. This guy deals with everything related to sound and language. Remember that phone number we talked about? This is the part of your brain you're using when you repeat it over and over in your head to keep it from disappearing. This system is literally the reason you can hear your own voice in your head when you're silently reading or rehearsing words. It holds on to that sound-based info for just a couple of seconds, unless you keep that loop going. Okay, so we've covered sound. Now for our second specialist, the visuospatial sketchpad. And just like the name suggests, this part handles what things look like and where they are. It's your mind's inner eye. This is the system that lets you picture your friend's face in your mind, or mentally map out the directions to a coffee shop, or even just remember the layout of your own room. It's all about processing the visual world. And finally, there's a fourth component that was actually added to the model a bit later. It's called the episodic buffer, and it acts like an integration hub. It's a temporary space that grabs info from both the sound and visual systems and bundles it all together into a single coherent moment or episode. This component is absolutely crucial because it's what creates our smooth, continuous experience of reality. It binds everything together, sights, sounds, and even info from your long-term memory, so you can make sense of what's happening right here, right now. Okay, but this all sounds like a pretty neat theory, right? How do we actually know that this team of memory components is real and not just a clever idea? Well, psychologists used a really ingenious method called the dual task technique to prove it. So picture this. You're in an experiment. First, they ask you to memorize a list of words. Easy enough. But then, while you're holding those words in your mind, they give you a second task. If you're in group A, you have to draw a picture. If you're in group B, you have to write out a paragraph. So, what do you think happened? Who remembered more of those original words? Was it the people who were drawing or the people who were writing? Well, the results were crystal clear. Group A, the drawers, did much, much better at remembering the list of words. Why? Because they were using two different systems, their visual spatial sketchpad for the drawing and their phonological loop for the words. Group B, on the other hand, really struggled. Their two tasks, remembering words and writing text, were both verbal. They were essentially trying to force two jobs through one employee, the phonological loop. This caused a bottleneck or interference, which tanked their performance. And that right there was powerful evidence that these systems are separate and have their own limited capacity. So let's zoom out. What's the big takeaway here? Let's quickly go over why this model is so important, because it's got some serious strengths, but it's not perfect. The working memory model has been hugely influential, for sure. It's way more realistic than that old multi-store model, and it's backed by tons of experiments. But it's not the whole story. It really only explains short-term memory. And that super important boss, the central executive, it's still kind of a mystery, and it's really hard to measure. But one of its biggest strengths, without a doubt, is how it applies to the real world. Take learning difficulties, for example. Research now suggests that many of the challenges tied to dyslexia might actually stem from issues within the phonological loop, making it harder to process verbal information. So you see, this isn't just theory. It has real practical importance. At the end of the day, this model gives us a much more useful map of our active minds. It shows us that true multitasking isn't really a thing. It's not about doing two complex things at once. It's really about how well your own personal central executive can manage its specialized team, expertly switching your attention between tasks that use different resources. So the question is, now that you've met the team, how will you manage yours?